Over the last 12 months or so, I have noticed a frequently recurring motif in several high-profile video games, that being the focus on babysitting. Whether it's Donkey Kong Bananza, Death Stranding 2, Resident Evil Requiem, or the recently released Pragmata, it seems the idea of a young companion being carried throughout an adventure by a guardian has been particularly popular recently. I find it pretty interesting that all these games ended up coming out around the same time. I'm left wondering if there's something deeper to this trend of parental care in video games, or if this is all just some crazy coincidence. Now, this concept is of course nothing totally new. The idea of a protagonist having to care for a younger character has been in media and video games forever. One of the earliest examples I can think of is Yoshi's Island on SNES. In this all-time great 2D platformer, Yoshi must help Baby Mario and Baby Luigi return home to their parents in the Mushroom Kingdom. The babies are also a key focus of the gameplay, where if Yoshi takes damage, he loses Baby Mario and a countdown starts, accompanied by quite possibly the most obnoxious and stress-inducing sound in the history of gaming. The player must grab Baby Mario from the bubble before the timer runs out, or they will lose. I mean, honestly, whoever created that soundbite should work for the CIA because they could get info out of anyone. I'm pretty sure constantly hearing this noise growing up may be the main culprit in telling my brain I don't want kids. Because yeah, I heard this crying a lot, as Yoshi's Island is one of my favorite games ever. The levels are extremely fun and creative, the graphics and music are so uniquely Yoshi's Island, and it's just an adorable game all around. As a kid who really loved Yoshi, I was so obsessed with it. I also think Yoshi's Island was a very important game in Nintendo's history. It was a pretty big risk when you really think about it. Yoshi was a fairly new character being given his own game, and it was even being branded as Super Mario World 2, despite having very little similarities to the original. Not only were you risking ticking people off with that naming structure, but you were also immediately drawing comparisons to what is often considered one of the greatest video games ever made. Somehow though, Yoshi's Island was up to the task and received similar rave reviews. It was also a huge commercial success, selling over 4 million copies. I think all of that praise showed Nintendo that Mario spin-offs were legitimately viable, even if they didn't directly star the main man himself. And perhaps in a weird way, Yoshi's Island also laid the groundwork for the future Babysitter games we'll discuss throughout this video. In the early 2000s, the trend took a little bit of a hiatus. There were some big companion-based games such as Eco, where the main character has the princess by his side, or Resident Evil 4, where Leon must protect the president's daughter, but neither quite fit the bill of what we're talking about here. Both characters in Eco are young, and in Resident Evil 4, Ashley is 20 years old, so it's not exactly the same as the young child with the parental figure trope we see today. I would say the true next evolution of the Babysitter game came in the 2010s with two main games in particular. The first was Telltale's The Walking Dead, featuring the iconic duo of Lee and Clementine. Our main character Lee is being taken to jail on the day of the outbreak. However, on the way there, the cop driving him hits a zombie in the middle of the road, allowing Lee to escape. But he now finds himself in the midst of an apocalypse. Eventually, he comes across a young girl named Clementine who is stuck home alone due to her parents being out of state. From that point on, Lee does whatever he can to protect Clementine throughout the course of the game, and they lean on each other until the end. It's an extremely touching and equally devastating storyline that is elevated by Telltale's style of choice and branching storylines. The Walking Dead caused a genre revolution, with Telltale-style choice-based games taking over following its release. Telltale got their hands on more major IP than you would even believe, and tons of similar games from other studios followed suit, such as Life is Strange or Until Dawn. It wasn't the world's longest fad, but it was strong, and for a few good years, totally dominated the gaming world, especially on social media. When a plot is formed through your personal choices, there's a level of connection there that you really can't replicate any other way. I don't know that I would necessarily say it's better, and I don't want every game to be structured this way, but it's certainly highly effective when done right. Ironically enough, just around 1 year later, another apocalyptic game centered around a young girl and her father figure was released on PlayStation 3. I am obviously referring to The Last of Us from Naughty Dog. In this game, our main character Joel is tasked with transporting a kid named Ellie to the Fireflies, a militia group working to find a cure. But along their journey across America, a strong bond is formed between the two, and leads Joel to make some bold decisions with eventual heavy consequences. The Last of Us was able to take the emotional and dramatic storytelling we saw in The Walking Dead and combine it with the high-level gameplay we expected from a developer like Naughty Dog, and this led to an experience that was really unlike anything we had seen before. For better or for worse, it changed how video games were viewed and created. It came at a time when video game narratives were beginning to shift, at least in the way they were viewed by the general public. It was becoming more common to see people speak about games the same way they talk about film or television, highlighting great narratives and acting performances as opposed to gameplay or level design. Some would argue this is where everything went wrong, but let's save that discussion for another day, because whether you like it or not, The Last of Us is easily one of the most influential video games ever made. You can look at almost any cinematic, story-driven third-person game made post-2013 and see shades of The Last of Us all over it. And while most of the time that influence is seen through writing or gameplay, it seems like the Joel and Ellie dynamic specifically left a strong, lasting impression. It caused what some refer to as the dadification of video games, where we saw tons of IPs go down a path of aging up their protagonist and often placing them alongside their child or a childlike young sidekick. Characters like Kratos or Marcus Phoenix were given older, semi-retired storylines in which they now have a child. The sad dad syndrome has continued to grow in frequency, culminating into what appears to be its peak over the last year or so. Since this time last year, 4 different high-profile AAA games have been released that can fit into the category of Babysitter game. All of these games are quite different. There's a platformer, a horror game, an action romp, and a walking sim, but they do all have one huge similarity: a young companion character who is a crucial element of the story and gameplay. And I just find it really funny that they all came out so close together. As someone who played all 4 of these games in the past year, it's definitely become noticeable. I've spent way more time carrying children throughout video game worlds than I ever would have expected, and it seems I'm not the only one who has become aware of this trend, which leads to the question of what exactly is causing this storyline to become so frequent. Well, the conspiratorial folks out there have one idea in particular. If you know your video game developers, then you know the 4 main games I've pointed to as part of this trend all have something else in common. They all come from Japanese game developers. And as we speak, Japan is going through a bit of an internal crisis with plummeting birth rates. The country has seen a consistent decline for 10 consecutive years, with 2025 marking a record low for newborns. It's reached a point where deaths in the country are now outpacing births. CNN projected that by 2070, Japan's total population will drop by over 30 million people, with 40% of that remaining population being over 65 years old. Japan's government has been doing everything they can in recent years to try and stop this downward trend. They've increased financial incentives to have a child, invested in their childcare services, and have even subsidized dating apps. And no, I'm not kidding about that last one. Knowing how powerful video games are in Japanese culture, is it really that crazy to think they may be looking to the medium as another possible solution? I mean, hey, Hideki Kamiya joked on Twitter that their Bayonetta spinoff could influence people to want a kid, so maybe there's something to it. But Kamiya troll tweets aside, I want to be clear, I'm not exactly stamping my name on this take, mainly because I think the way some people are talking about Pragmata specifically is very strange and in some cases deeply concerning. And in all honesty, I don't really think someone at Capcom animated a cutscene of Diana playing with a toy and thought, yes, I've done it, I saved Japan. They probably just thought it was cute and would help endear the player to her, since that's a pivotal element for the game's story to have any real meaning. But knowing how influential video games are in Japan, and knowing there is a very genuine problem with birth rates, it is at the very least a thought-provoking theory. A much more likely and less socially unhinged reason is simply that gamers and game developers have gotten older. Those who grew up playing games and went on to make them are now adults and might have children of their own. influencing these kinds of storylines. Our Last of Us example from earlier is proof of this, with Neil Druckmann saying the birth of his daughter had a heavy influence on the story he wrote. And the developers may be finding that these stories resonate quite well with a group of gamers who are also older and may now also have kids. The feelings that coincide with caring for a child are powerful, making it an easy target for a storyline hoping to invoke emotions. And it's also one that anyone with a kid of their own can immediately relate to and become extremely attached to. Similar to how anyone with a dog is going to feel some type of way watching Marley and Me, a dad playing Death Stranding 2 is going to be hit pretty hard. So maybe this uptick in child sidekick video games isn't some grand conspiracy, it's simply a sign of the industry's maturation and age. Admittedly, there are also a few pretty obvious counterpoints to all of this though, and it really is likely nothing more than a coincidence. First off, the reasons for having these young characters in the 4 games we've mentioned are all totally different. Lou in Death Stranding serves as a motivator for Sam, Emily in Requiem helps push the story along and explain why Grace doesn't just run away the first chance she gets. And Pauline in Bananza seems like an addition they landed on for no real reason other than they just needed someone who could talk throughout the story instead of being stuck with Donkey Kong grunting for 30 hours straight. And that's before we even mention the most obvious fact that the development timelines of these games don't match up. Pragmata, for example, was originally announced in 2020 with an expected release date of 2022. It ended up 4 years late, which ironically placed it right alongside other similar experiences. And we all know Death Stranding 2 is a sequel to a game that came out all the way back in 2019 with similar themes long before this trend had really taken hold. So no, I don't think the Japanese government came to game studios and said, please help make people want to procreate, and funneled us babysitting games throughout the mid-2020s, but I guess it does kind of feel like it. The child and parental figure duo is a plotline I don't see going away anytime soon. There's clearly something about this setup that just works. I mean, all 4 of these games I highlighted today are legitimately fantastic and among my favorites in recent memory. So no matter what weird spins people try to put on it, it probably is nothing deeper than older game devs wanting to tell stories that align with where they currently are in life, leading to a funny coincidence with a few corresponding releases. And if it is all a psyop from the Japanese government, well, then they're not doing a very good job. I mean, seriously, drop all your packages in Death Stranding while Lou pierces your ears with her cry and tell me it made you want a kid.